Hey, good morning everybody. Welcome to this edition of Quarantine Collections. My name is Travis Gilbert. I'm the Educator and Collections Coordinator here at the Old Baldy Foundation. And we're so thankful that you can join us for another edition of our virtual programming. Today on this Saturday morning, the sun is trying to peek out here at Bald Head Island after a few rainy days, to say the least. We had our first major thunderstorms of the year this week. So I'm a big fan of thunderstorms. I'm not sure about you. So I really loved the show that was put on for us. Today we have some special things in the works. So first of all, a caveat. This morning I'm going to talk about the river lights. And these were a system of lights, whether they be range lights or small lighthouses or buoys and beacons, that lined the Cape Fear River from the mouth of the Cape Fear down here at Bald Head Island, the whole way to the port of Wilmington, 20, almost 30 miles upstream. And these were put in place around the year 1850. It was 1849, 1850, into the early 1850s. And most of them only received about a decade of service, because many of them were destroyed or dismantled or discontinued during the American Civil War. And as a whole, they were not systematically put back into place after the American Civil War, because the Lighthouse Service found cheaper alternatives to rather than these expensive lighthouses and range lights and whatnot. So we're going to talk, and we're going to imagine ourselves in a boat. The pilot's going to meet us out at the mouth of the Cape Fear, and I'm going to show you all the different lighthouses that we would pass in reaching the Port of Wilmington upstream. And then in this afternoon, this morning's lesson is going to prep us for this afternoon. We have some crazy things in our works. Our quarantine, I didn't know there was a term for this, but my family is not local, so folks across the nation, when we went into social distancing 6-7 weeks ago, folks were quarantining, meaning that they collected, 2 or 3 people that they wanted to make their family, and that's how they were going to social distance within that kind of chosen family, if you will. Well, I'm sure y'all are aware, our executive director and I kind of quarantined together, but our Chris Webb's neighbors down here, Steve and Kristen Henson, we also kind of quarantined with them. So us 4, we've kind of been teamed up and social distancing together as a household. And luckily, not only is Steve and Kristen Henson some of the most generous people I've ever met, I could not do my job without their generosity and their support. Steve is constantly reminding me of my value here and how much he appreciates the history, and he shows that by giving us donations. The case behind me was purchased with his generosity and many others. He sponsors our historic happy hours. He's just an incredible guy, and his wife Kristen. Well, they have a boat. They have their own boat here. So we're going to take that boat out into the river, and we're going to go across to Southport and to Price's Creek Lighthouse. We're going to see some things. Now, the caveat is that might not be able to be live. We're not quite sure whether we can do that live. So regardless, we will post something on this Facebook page at 2 o'clock this afternoon, okay? So whether we can do it live or not, there will be something posted at 2 o'clock this afternoon from out in the field, in addition to touring with Travis. In fact, it'll be a really awesome edition of Touring with Travis. So let me check here on Facebook. I see we have a bunch of comments out there, a bunch of listeners. I love to hear what y'all are doing out there, where you're listening from, how y'all have been, how you're holding up, are you staying positive, everybody healthy out there? So drop us a line in those comments. It makes it really interactive and fun. We have Kara is saying good morning. Good morning to you, Kara, and Jace out there in Kentucky. It is great to hear from you on this Saturday morning. Jeff and Garrett are up there in Raleigh. Good morning, Jeff and Garrett. It's great to hear from you. Ann is saying, hey Travis, great to see you today. Thank you for doing these. It is my pleasure. Absolutely, Ann. We appreciate you tuning in this morning. And Juanita from up there in Newville, Pennsylvania, saying, finally another one I can watch live. Hi, Travis, and thank you for doing these wonderful videos. It is my pleasure, Juanita. It is great to hear from you. And she is happy and healthy in Newville. That's great. And Kara, it sounds awesome. Hope the technology cooperated. It sure did. The technology was seamless this morning. We're not sure what happened with those terrible storms yesterday, but we were not getting our fill yesterday. So Tara is watching and Donna is watching. We have several people watching, so thank you very much for joining us this morning. And Christian is saying, tuned in again from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. Staying positive, need a haircut, starting to look like a sheepdog. Well, Christian, I look like a sheepdog even without a pandemic going on, so nobody can blame you. I'm sure we'll all be able to get a haircut fairly soon. So, first of all, know that there is roughly 30 miles of river water that ships must navigate when they reach the mouth of the river down here between Bald Head Island and Oak Island and the Port of Wilmington upstream. And in those roughly 30 miles of river water, there are 20-some turns in navigation a ship must partake today in the 21st century. There really has been no less back in the 20th and 19th and 18th centuries. That's a significant amount of turns in navigation you must partake. And the worst of these is at the very beginning, where the river channel makes a sweeping S-turn. It heads to the east and it brushes up against Bald Head Island, only to make a sharp left-hand turn to the west, where it goes by Battery Island, only again to make a sharp north, slightly northeast turn right in front of Southport, where it heads roughly in a northeastern direction straight up to the Port of Wilmington. So in the antebellum era, before the American Civil War, when we don't have radar, we don't have sonar, how are you navigating this very difficult river channel to get your cargo and to get your passengers to the Port of Wilmington? Well, it's because beginning in 1849 and 1850, the United States Lighthouse Service created a system of lighthouses and beacons and buoys and range lights to help ships navigate themselves the whole way up the mouth of the Cape Fear River. And this was really spurred in the mid to mid-late 19th century because the invention of the steam engine. The Prometheus, around 1808, was one of the first steamships to navigate the waters of the Cape Fear River. And by 1819, we have a president. President James Monroe is aboard the Prometheus in the Cape Fear River, traveling from Wilmington the whole way down to Southport. Yesterday was the anniversary of the body of Senator and former Vice President John C. Calhoun. In his funeral procession from Washington, D.C. back to Charleston, his body went down a steamship from Wilmington to Smithville. Now today we know it as Southport. So with the invention of the steamship in the 19th century, it's only increasing the amount of traffic on that river. And this river is dark. So we need to light up this river and to create a systematic, methodological way to communicate to these steamships and the sail-powered schooners and sloops and whatnot on how to safely navigate this river. And they created a plan with an appropriation of Congress in 1848. So it was between 1849 and 1855 that these lighthouses and range lights and beacons and buoys were created through that 1848 appropriation from Congress. There were 3 pairs of range lights. There's one at Oak Island, one at Price's Creek, and what we would call an upper jetty. Additionally, there were 2 small lighthouses constructed. Those were at Orton Point and at Campbell's Island, almost reaching Wilmington. The range lights at Oak Island, at Price's Creek, and the Upper Jetty, along with the small lighthouses at Orton's Point and Campbell's Island, worked in conjunction with the two main lighthouses, one being, of course, Old Baldy here on Bald Head Island, and the other being at the Federal Point Lighthouse up at New Inlet, that access point from the Atlantic Ocean into the Cape Fear River that was created by a hurricane in the year 1761, roughly 9 or so miles north of Bald Head Island. So let's explain, first of all, what is a range light? And we've talked about this before. You may have joined us in a previous episode. Range lights were used by pilots, these men assisting the captains in navigating the river channel, in addition to the ship captains themselves, in order to correctly position their vessel or their ship in the river channel. All right? And you used it because there were two lights in a range light. The one in front or on the riverside was shorter than the one further away from the river, which was taller. And you lined up the front shorter light directly in front of the rear taller light. And if those lights were one in front of the other, your ship was in the correct angle to navigate that ship channel. If the lights were slightly beside one another, you were not in the correct angle and you were in a trajectory to run aground or run out of the river channel into shoal or shallow water. So anytime you saw these river lights, you kept them one in front of the other. And again, there were three pairs, one at Oak Island, one at Price's Creek, and one at the Upper Jetty. The Oak Island lighthouses were created in 1849, and there were two brick towers. One was 27 feet tall, that was in the front, and the one behind was 37 feet tall, all right? They were first created in 1849, and they held 10 Winslow Lewis type lamps. These are lamps with a hollow wick that you light. They are fueled by whale oil, and behind them is placed a parabolic reflector. This copper, silver-plated parabola, which helps bounce some of that light that would be casted back onto land. Rather than back onto land, it hits that reflector and bounces it back out onto the horizon. And then by 1856, those range lights on Oak Island receive a fifth-order Fresnel lens. And in the lighthouse service reports, we have from 1852, the first annual report that is created. This is how those lights are described. John G. Brickman, keeper, took charge September 23rd, 1849. Worked on Fort Caswell previous to taking charge. And these range lights were very close to Fort Caswell over on Oak Island. These two lights are placed 130 yards apart and serve as leading marks to cross Oak Island Bar. But they are too close together. Keeper leaves the lights to go to Wilmington for his pay. Well, that's no good. Towers were built in 1849 of brick, look very well. Lime mortar, do not leak, one 20 feet and the other 30 feet in height. It's a mistake, 27 and 37 feet. Lanterns of heavy iron, vertical and very broad. Glass of the lantern 28 by 12 inches. 10 reflectors, 14-inch spherical in each tower. Very badly placed on the frame. Oops. 3 of one and 4 of the lamps on the other are entirely useless. Ooh, that's not good. In consequence of their being placed around the entire circle without regard to the objects of the light. The lights of the 3 of the lamps in the tower nearest to sea were thrown upon the iron door of the lantern and the woods to the westward. Lantern is very small, no room to pass around the apparatus. I think when the keeper's trying to clean, there's not enough room between the apparatus and the window. He's probably a tight squeeze is what they're saying. Inspected 1 to 2 years by the collector at Wilmington. Supplied with spare glass, but no putty. Lantern and dome inside black with soot and has never been painted white. Both lanterns dirty, reflectors scratched, and inferior in construction. Lamps pretty good. Burners as usual, 4 spare lamps and burners. No trimming scissors, no journal kept, cannot read or write. The keeper, John G. Brickman, cannot read or write, so he's not creating some reliable reports from Oak Island range lights. Does not know how much oil is consumed each night. Gets a friend at the fort to make quarterly returns for him. Oil is always good. Lights at sunset, puts out at sunrise, trims at midnight in summer, does not understand lighting or trimming lamps. Lights are decidedly bad. Burners and lamps are never cleaned out. Glass in the lantern is never clean. No curtains. Towers want whitewashing. Wood want neat. Dwelling house is in good order, though. Pretty clean. Water from a cistern in good order. Gave instructions to him about keeping his lights. Lights improved during the stay in that quarter. Everything is common. There are no instructions when he took in charge. If these lights had been put on wooden piles, they would have cost less, and at the same time they would answer to a better purpose. Now are threatened by sand. So not a very good report for the Oak Island range lights. Unfortunately, very common before the professionalization of the Lighthouse Service. In the year 1852, this is the first year that the Lighthouse Service is being put in charge of a 9-member body or board, the Lighthouse Service Board of professionals. Previously, it was almost like political patronage. So this is very common to find keepers without the adequate skill or without the adequate instructions on how to properly perform their job. And that's clearly what is happening here at the Oak Island Range Light. So that Oak Island Range Light helping these mariners get into the river. Now the next range lights were that you would pass, and you're over the bar, you've used Oak Island, you've used Old Baldy, you're going past Southport, you're heading in the direction upstream, you're eventually going to reach Price's Creek Lighthouse. And Price's Creek Lighthouse is still with us. That is one of the most wonderful things. It is one of the only range lights that is still around in the state of North Carolina. They were placed there in 1850. There was a brick tower placed in front, and that was a 25-foot tower. And that is what remains. That tower you see just as you're leaving or just as you're entering Deep Point Marina is the front tower of the Price's Creek range lights. The rear tower was placed on top of the keeper's cottage. So you had a keeper's cottage, and on top of the roof of the cottage was placed that lantern room. So the remains you see today are the front tower, which is roughly 25 feet tall. The rear tower on top of the keeper's cottage was 35 feet tall. And again, you line themselves up, and that got you past where is Deep Point Marina today. In the Lighthouse Service Report, it describes the Price's Creek range lights as 2 beacon lights, one 35 feet and one 25 feet in height. John Bell is the keeper. Range lights for the channel, lighted January 1st, 1851. Again, built in 1850, first lit, first of the year, 1851. Highlight wooden tower on Keeper's house. This is the rear light. Keeper's house is brick, leaks badly all over. Lantern and sashes, black inside and dirty. Once painting white, leaks badly. House clean inside. Materials of which built bad. Gutters out of order. Once repairs badly. Materials too thin for the purpose. Finished by the collector with 404 gallons of oil. By Howland in May, 125 gallons of oil. Trims twice during the night. Has a cistern for fresh water. Kitchen smoked so badly it could not be used. Built one himself. The work received from Mr. Wood, the contractor, by 2 citizens of Wilmington and the collector. And it's curious enough, it's Robert Wood. Robert Barclay Wood was his name. He is a brick mason in Wilmington, and my previous job at the Lower Cape Fear Historical Society very much entailed telling the story of the Wood brothers, and specifically Robert Barclay Wood. These were brick masons. They were brothers. They built the Latimer House, where the Historical Society is headquartered. They built St. James Episcopal Church. They built the First Catholic Church, St. Thomas Preservation Hall. They worked on so many different structures in downtown Wilmington, perhaps even Thalian Hall. So it's funny that, these were such prominent brick masons in town up in Wilmington. They are brought down here, and that's what they're speaking of. It's the Wood brothers, Robert Barclay Wood, that construct the Brick Keeper's Cottage in the rear range light at Price's Creek and the front range light, again, constructed by the Wood brothers. A nice connection to Wilmington. So they're saying the Wood brothers had the usual instructions from the 5th auditor. That is Stephen Pleasanton, and that was the gentleman that worked under the Treasury Department as the 5th auditor of the United States, who had the charge of facilitating the activities of the United States Lighthouse Service before the year 1852, when it's placed in this board of professionals. So that's where a lot of these problems derive from, because Stephen Pleasanton was not a mariner and he didn't know anything about lighthouses. He knew how to keep under budget. He knew how to be a figures guy, a numbers guy. He knew how to facilitate as an administrator, but he did not have the best interests of the Lighthouse Service at heart in terms of effectiveness and efficiency with technology. He just wanted to keep the bottom dollar low. And that's why he employed this gentleman called Winslow Lewis to produce most of the lamps for the Lighthouse Service in the pre-war eras. And clearly they're throwing him under the bus here. The 5th auditor, he gave all these instructions to build Price's Creek, and it's no good. It's out of order. They're complaining about the keeper now, very similar to the Oak Island range lights. Had no experience in keeping lights before he was appointed to use. He used to hang up 2 hand lanterns for the steamboat company. The brick tower, the lower light, leaks badly through the lantern. 8 14-inch spherical reflectors in each lantern. So 8 Winslow Lewis lamps with 14-inch spherical reflectors behind, very similar to the Oak Island range light. Soapstone floor to lantern to tower is loose. Reflector is loose on the frame and not placed properly. 2-inch lantern and no use, their light being thrown on land and woods. No conductor to brick tower. Copper conductor to dwelling on higher tower. These 2 lights are too close together for good range and very little use. So as far as could be learned of those, it is who believe they're most interest of them. So they're saying they're very similar to Oak Island, that they're too close together. So you imagine, in order to line one up in front of the other, you need to have a little bit of distance, all right? Right? You can't be right up close and try to line them up. The angle is still not going to be correct, and it'll be very difficult to line them up. You need to have some distance. And they're saying that the distance of these 2 lights, they're too close together. It makes it very difficult for a mariner in the channel to line the lights up. So we're all wrapping up here, but I think the theme of today is it's a lot of money and expense and time and effort put into these range lights and these river lights, and they're not doing very good. So once you pass the range light of Price's Creek, you're heading upstream. And I will say Price's Creek was used as a lookout tower and a semaphore station for semaphore flags during the American Civil War. That's how they communicated from Fort Fisher over into Southport, and then of course on to Fort Caswell and Fort Holmes here on Bald Head Island. So after you pass the Price's Creek range light, you're going to go to a light called the Orton Point light. And it was placed in the year 1849. This was not a range light, meaning that it was just one small lighthouse. And it was not used to get yourself in the correct position of the river channel. It was used to warn mariners of a point or an extension of the banks of the Cape Fear River that jutted out compared to the rest of the riverbank. So it was a promontory, it was a point, it was almost like a cape on the banks of the Cape Fear River that you needed to warn mariners of. And it was placed in 1849, and it was a it was a 25-foot lighthouse made of brick, and it was placed on Orton Plantation, which was a plantation built in the late 1820s throughout the 1830s by King Roger Moore. He's the brother of Maurice Moore, who established the port of Brunswick Town in the year 1726, the first permanent English settlement here in the lower Cape Fear region. And it was owned by, of course, Benjamin Smith in the early 19th century. Benjamin Smith, the last of the Smiths to own Bald Head Island, also termed Smith Island. So Orton's Point is described in the Lighthouse Service report as, this is the first light pass in ascending the Cape Fear River after leaving the light vessel. It's a small reflector light on the dwelling of the keeper. The whole building bears evidence of bad construction and a most injudicious location. Woo, I couldn't pronounce that word. The water at the ordinary half tides washes the walls of brick on the dwelling. It bears the mark of premature decay. So, unfortunately, it's too close to the river. At high tides, king tides, storms, the river water is beating up against the walls of this Orton Point Lighthouse and having it being a premature decay. Very, very unfortunate. Now, when you pass Orton's Point Light, you reach an area that is called Horseshoe Shoal. Horseshoe Shoal was an area that was the reason that Brunswick Town was actually built. Horseshoe Shoal is directly across the river from where New Inlet entered the river, up to your Federal Point. And because that river water is pushing itself into the Cape Fear River, even before the New Inlet was opened in 1761, and certainly much worse after the inlet was created in 1761, there's a shoal. So deeper vessel ships with a deeper draft could not ascend the river beyond Horseshoe Shoal. And since Brunswick Town was right there, right downstream from Horseshoe Shoal, that designated the furthest upstream that ships could travel in the colonial era, so that's why they built a town there. Once they were able to build ships with a smaller draft and watch New Inlet open, they could ascend the river up towards Wilmington. But there was a light vessel placed at Horseshoe Shoal. All right, and it had a fog bell on the channel as well to warn during the fog tide, and that just basically warned folks of that Horseshoe Shoal area where they couldn't place a lighthouse because they had to put it in the middle of the river in this very shallow part of the river. And they're saying here, it's saying Simon Grinsom is the keeper, not on board. Found the vessel in charge of a Negro boy who said he was about 14 years old. Vessel anchored with chain and anchor. Lights like all the rest seen from the United States with 7 small wicks placed in a square frame with glass 7 by 9 inches badly put in, glazing occupying a large space on the edge of the glass. The vessel was very dirty in every part. In the hold, 2 oil tanks, an oil barrel with some empty water casks, some chains piled up, supposed to be spare moorings. The keeper of this vessel is reported to be a regular river pilot. Have no means to ascertaining by whom the vessel is cared for except the boy's answers. This is a miserable light. Seldom seen at anchorage off Smithville, distance of 3 to 5 miles, docks wanting wetting, cleaning to preserve them. Continuing our trend here this morning, folks, not very well maintained, lots of inconsistencies. Either this was a very harsh report, or as I'm assuming, and I'm kind of hinting upon, it is the lighthouse service was extremely mismanaged before 1852, before it is placed in the service of this board of professionals. So this lightship warning of Horseshoe Bend above Smithville, opposite New Inlet, not very good. So as you're ascending up towards the river, you've gotten into the river using Old Baldy and Oak Island range lights. You do the S-turn past Smithville. You use your range lights at Price's Creek, at Deep Point Marina today. You get past there. You go past Horseshoe Shoals, working your way up. You're warned by the Horseshoe Shoals by this lightship. Then you get to Orton's Point, and you're warned about that cape or that jutting out on the riverbank by Orton's Point. You're nearing Wilmington. There's one more small lighthouse that is built, and it is called Campbell's Point Lighthouse, or Campbell's Island Lighthouse. This is a large island in the mouth of in the Cape Fear River, just downstream from Wilmington. And there's another 25-foot lighthouse that is placed on the southern extremity or point of Campbell's Island. It's very near River Lights today. If you're familiar with Wilmington, it is near the River Lights area. It's still called Campbell's Island. You can row out there. Actually, a few years ago, I was out there in a kayak. If the tides are right, you can plan it well. And not much to say about that lighthouse. It actually never appears in the United States Lighthouse reports here, but we do know that it's a 25-foot lighthouse, and by 1856 it's given a 6-order Fresnel lens, the smallest of the Fresnel lens. It was just an edge of a marshy area at the edge of this island to warn ships of that island right in the middle of the Cape Fear River. And the river channel went to the east of the island. It went to the right of the island, although there was a slough, there was a area of the river where you could go to the left or the west of the island. The main river channel went to the east. And this was an area where Confederates put up major obstructions because the river channel really narrows at this point. You think you have a big island in the middle of the river, you need to go to the eastern edge of that island. There was a line of obstructions, sunken vessels and sunken obstructions placed during the American Civil War by the Confederates in order to prevent the Navy from ascending the river, where the river channel really narrows at this point as you're approaching the port of Wilmington. Eric is saying, good morning from Holden Beach. I've done a ton of surveying on Bald Head Island. Well, good morning, Eric. Thank you for joining us this morning. I appreciate you joining in this morning and learning a little bit about Bald Head Island. So, folks, if you're out there listening, drop us a line in the comments. We'd love to hear from you and let us know your connection to Bald Head Island as we wrap up this morning. So the final lights that assisted you in reaching the port of Wilmington were these upper jetty lights. And they were placed on the east side of the Cape Fear River, roughly 3 miles south of Wilmington. Today, it is around the area of Sunset Park. It's around where the port of Wilmington is today. Sunset Park area, Greenfield Lake area itself. And these were back to the range lights, just like at Oak Island or just like at Price's Creek. You're lining themselves up, and it's helping you get through that last stretch, that last 3 miles or so before reaching the port of Wilmington. All right, they had 6-order Fresnel lens, so the smallest of the lens. The front range light was placed on top of the keeper's cottage, so very similar to the rear range light at Price's Creek. That was destroyed. It's not what you see today. And very similar to the Orton Point Lighthouse. Again, the lantern room is placed on the roof of the keeper's cottage. So that is the rear light, that is the front light at the upper jetty light. And then the rear light was placed about 800 feet behind the keeper's cottage house, and it was on a frame, a wooden frame of sorts. So no brick, no masonry, nowhere to go in and stay dry if there was a thunderstorm coming. Just an open frame, very similar to what they're going to build on Bald Head Island in 1903 with Cape Fear Light Station. Kind of think of like a cell phone tower, an antenna of sorts, just a frame construction. And that helped you reach that last distance. And I will tell you that the last stretch of Wilmington, right as you're entering the port, there is this old tradition in Wilmington called the dram tree. And it's kind of like a navigational aid. And the dram tree was a small site, not a small, excuse me, I don't know why I said that, a large and ancient cypress tree right at the port of Wilmington, right beyond the upper jetty range lights. And it was called the dram tree because that designated that you made it safely through that roughly 30 miles of river water using all these river lights, beginning with Oak Island and Old Baldy, ending with the upper jetty lights 3 miles south of Wilmington. Once you reached that dram tree, that ancient cypress tree on the east bank of the Cape Fear River, you knew that your ship was safely in port, and legend and tradition says everyone on board got a dram of rum, a shot of rum, once they reached the dram tree, because they made it safely in the port of Wilmington. So what happened to this system of lights? Well, like I said, they were in operation for about a decade, about 1850 to 1861 when the Civil War breaks out. And then Governor John Ellis in April of 1861, when the American Civil War breaks out, orders that all the navigational aids in North Carolina be extinguished. And the lights in the lower Cape Fear, all these lights were extinguished, and then they had a variety of purposes and uses by the Confederate military officials during the Civil War. The Oak Island range lights were placed out of service because of the construction of Fort Campbell, in addition to the adaptations wrought on Fort Caswell. Of course, Old Baldy was extinguished and used for a time at the end of the war with a smaller light to help guide blockade runners in. Price's Creek range lights, they were used as a signal station for Confederate troops communicating from Fort Fisher on the eastern side of the Cape Fear River with Fort Anderson and Smithville and other fortifications on the western bank of the Cape Fear River. Campbell's Island Lighthouse was destroyed during the American Civil War. So lots of damage, lots of destruction during the American Civil War. And following the American Civil War, the Lighthouse Service ordered Jeremy Smith, the acting Union lighthouse engineer and inspector, to discontinue and abandon all Cape Fear navigational aids. The board decided to replace all these lights, all these expensive brick and mortar lights, with post lights, pole-mounted brass lanterns that could burn for roughly a week before they had to be refilled. Much, much easier, much cheaper, way less employees. Because as you see in the 1852, it wasn't working. They had a wonderful idea, they had a wonderful system in place, but there was too many assets, too many liabilities, too many employees that were not instructed well, too much upkeep and too much maintenance. It was much easier to put a brass lantern on a pole and stake it there and have one gentleman going up and down the river filling them up. And that's where the Lighthouse Service goes. That's where the direction they had after the American Civil War. So what is left of all these range lights? Price's Creek. Unfortunately, the front light of Price's Creek is still with us. All right, when you let's say you are heading to Bald Head Island aboard the ferry, you look to your left just as you're leaving the marina. Look to your left and you will see a small brick tower. And that is the front tower of Price's Creek Lighthouse. Again, the rear tower that was atop the keeper's cottage is no longer. If you're heading towards Bald Head Island, just as you're making that left-hand turn to get into Deep Point Marina at the very end of if you're heading from Bald Head Island back to Deep Point, back to the mainland, when you make the left-hand turn going into Deep Point Marina, look to your right and you'll see it there. The best and closest view you can get is riding on the car ferry. Now, I know it's out of service right now. It's been for months, and we're not sure when it's going to get restarted again. But the North Carolina State Ferry System car ferry, known as the Fort Fisher Southport Ferry, right there on the Southport side, you get very, very close. In fact, that ferry system is using Price's Creek, where it dumps into the Cape Fear River. That is where they're loading and offloading. So you can get a very good view of Price's Creek range light from there. There is some remains, some foundational remains at Campbell's Island Lighthouse. Long before I knew that I'd be talking about lighthouses every day, I took a trip out there and was shown where the foundation is for Campbell Island Lighthouse. Lo and behold, now I'm talking about it every day. Did not know that a few years ago. But there is a remains, again, on the southern extremity of Campbell's Island. And I encourage you all, pull up Google Maps. It's really interesting to follow the Cape Fear River from the mouth to the Port of Wilmington, and you will see Campbell's Island there. It is uninhabited. It's a beautiful natural space, a bird sanctuary, I believe. If not, there are a lot of birds there. But there is a foundation there. But nothing left of the upper jetty, nothing left at Orton's Point Lighthouse, nothing left at Oak Island Range Lights, and then really nothing left at the New Inlet or Federal Point Lighthouse, which we're going to do a lesson on next week, discuss a little bit more in detail. So thank you for journeying with me up in the mountain, down the Cape Fear River. Emmeline says amazing topics again today. Kudos, Travis, and Emmeline and Dan. Thank you, Emmeline and Dan. Good morning to you both. It is great to hear from you. And Frank Newton says, morning, Travis, sitting in on another great history lesson. Thank you, Frank, for joining in. We appreciate you being with us, and we are glad to tie in some of your ancestors yesterday and telling the story of the longest day of Dunbar Davis. So as again this afternoon, we are having a very, very special, Mike Whaley is listening. Hey, Mike, it's great to hear from you. Oh, no, that's a different Mike. I'm sorry. Well, good morning to you, Mike. Thinking about somebody else. Hey, good morning to you. So we are going out this afternoon on the boat in the Cape Fear River. We may be doing some things from Price's Creek and from Deep Point Marina, who has a story to be told with the militia of the War of 1812. We have a lot in store this afternoon. So as I said, we're unsure about what our live conditions will be, but this is such an amazing opportunity to get out on the river. We want to bring it to you. So we will post something at 2 o'clock. It may not be live, folks, but we will. I know, yeah, Barry, yes, I know, it was not Mike. It was not Mike. Yeah, it was me, not Mike, he says. And yes, I know. I have a friend named Mike Whaley from up in Wilmington, and he's a big history buff, and that's what I thought it was. And then I just looked at the picture, and I said, that's not him. And Frank, have you ever got a chance to visit Newton Family Homestead State Historic Site at Federal Point? No, I have not. I'm familiar with their story up there, Frank, and I actually cracked open Master of the Shoals the other day when we were talking, I think last week or early this week, Frank, through the comments, I think on the Historical Society's Facebook page, I cracked open a Master of the Shoals just to remind myself of the Newtons. There's a lot more I need to learn about the Newtons, and Frank, when things get better and it is safe to kind of have a dialogue, I am going to invite you for a cup of coffee or a beer, whatever you'd like, in Southport, because I feel like there is a wealth of information that I would love for you to share with me so I can increase and expand upon my knowledge and help tell the story of your ancestors over here. So Frank, there is a cup of your choice in our future here when things get back to normal. And I'm looking forward to that day and looking forward to learning a little bit more about the Newtons. So folks, again, this afternoon at 2 o'clock, look for something on Facebook, whether it's live or not. It is going to be something that you do not want to miss. As always, you can find the previous episodes of our virtual programming on this Facebook Live, on our Instagram TV, or on our YouTube channel. When you're on YouTube, hit subscribe for us. Help us increase our social media presence. Go check out our online store at oldbaldy.org. We're having an online sale of reusable and recyclable items in honor of Arbor Day and Earth Day. We got reusable tote bags. We have recycled notebooks. Lots of great items there. Sun catchers are all on sale. And when you support and shop at oldbaldy.org, you are supporting the mission of the Old Baldy Foundation, which includes the preservation of North Carolina's oldest standing lighthouse and the education and interpretation of all this maritime history on Baldy Island and in the lower Cape Fear region. We have a historic happy hour coming up, another virtual historic happy hour. We're having a guest speaker, John and Aida Havel, from up in Cape Hatteras. They are from the Outer Banks Lighthouse Society and serve as historians at Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. They're going to be presenting virtually on May the 20th at 5 o'clock on the first photographs that we are aware of taken of Old Baldy Lighthouse, taken in early May of 1893 by a photographer named Herbert Bamber. The Havels, John and Aida, are the experts in the nation on Herbert Bamber. They're going to be sharing all our knowledge, and we're going to be exploring those 4 pictures. Again, the earliest known pictures of Old Baldy Lighthouse. You are not going to want to miss this virtual historic happy hour, and it is virtually free. If you go to oldbaldy.org and sign up for our monthly e-newsletter, there is a free code in that newsletter you may use to purchase your tickets to attend that virtual historic happy hour for free. But as always, if you'd like to make a donation and purchase a ticket for $15, we very sincerely and gratefully appreciate your generosity in the support of our mission. So again, find information about that virtual historic happy hour online at oldbaldy.org, and we will see you this afternoon for our last edition of Touring for Travis for the week. Thanks, folks, for tuning in. You all stay healthy and safe out there, and thank you to all our essential employees that are doing what they can to help our society function and run and get things back to normal eventually. So we'll see you this afternoon, folks. Thank you.